Now, there's a bit of a political game going on around China. This is what it's about, this China issue. The Deputy Leader, and I want to explain it to you, I told you we'll sort of keep a watch on things and tell you what matters. Deputy Leader Richard Marles made a speech in China in 2019. It was reported at the time, not widely, a couple of years ago. He talks about being aware of the growing role China was playing in the Pacific, providing assistance. But he says this, quote, "Let me be crystal clear. That was and is a good thing. The Pacific needs help, and Australia needs to welcome any country willing to provide it," unquote. It is a good thing. Now, he's got to address that. Is it a good thing that China has bribed its way into the Solomons, setting up a base on our doorstep? Is it still crystal clear that it's a good thing to have China buying influence in the Pacific? Richard Marles is trying to spin his way out of it. He's unavailable to talk today, so is the Foreign Affairs spokesman for Labor, Penny Wong. But he was in his regular spot in the Today program, and this is some of his spin in answer to a question from Alison Langdon, whether he stood by what he said.
Well, it's a statement of fact, but the point here is this. Australia needs to earn the right to be the natural partner of choice. We are in a strategic contest with China, and we win in the Pacific, and we win that by earning the right to be the natural partner of choice. And clearly, under this government, they have failed to do that. I mean, when we were in government, we were the natural partner of choice.
Natural partner of choice. Well, Peter Dutton, reading between the lines, told us yesterday that China had bribed local officials to get into the Solomons. Is that a good thing, Richard Marles? Senator James Patterson is a Liberal Senator Victoria, chair of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. Senator, good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
Okay. I noticed you say somewhere on your website this is a secret speech. It was actually reported at the time, you know.
Yes, but if you go looking for that speech today, Neil, the only place you can find it is on my website, not on Richard Marles' website. Richard Marles' website documents very accurately all of his other speeches, but not this one. And that's important because he's now been caught out saying a different thing in China to what he says in Australia. When he was in China, he said it's a good thing to have China in the Pacific, and he welcomed them. And in Australia, during an election campaign, he says there's something at fault of the Morrison government because China is active in the Pacific. And he has to explain that contradiction, and I don't think he did this morning.
There are also contradictions from your side, though. I mean, the Darwin port was leased to China under a coalition government. The Solomon Islands Security Pact did happen under a coalition government. Aren't these bigger concerns than Richard Marles making a speech and writing a book?
Neil, I've said many times, including I think on your program, that the lease of the Port of Darwin by the then Territory government should not have happened. And the federal government has since changed the law to make sure that it never happens again. And it was Scott Morrison first as Treasurer and then as Prime Minister who has led those changes to make sure it never happens again. So I'm very proud of our record in national security. I'm very proud to have a debate that compares our record on defence to theirs, which shows that they cut defence spending to the lowest levels since 1938 when they were last in office.
Okay, well, you mentioned the speech in 2019, which I say has been discussed, but not a lot of attention, and it's more relevant now that China has done the deal with the Solomons. But didn't he also release a little booklet last year on it? Does that say the same thing? I think it was September last year.
That's right. He released effectively a pamphlet, a long pamphlet last year, Neil, which doubled down on these claims, which went even further in some respects and said that Australia shouldn't be trying to engage in a strategy of denial against China in the Pacific, that we should welcome them as an aid and development partner in the Pacific. And he even said that the Millennium Development Goals are a more important priority for the Pacific than stopping a Chinese military base, and that claims about military bases in the Pacific were overblown. I mean, this just shows how naive he is. I mean, Australian intelligence has warned for years that it was an objective of the Chinese government to establish a military presence in the region, and Richard Marles was out there blithely denying that that was a risk at all.
Okay, well, what should happen? What needs to be done here, from your point of view?
Well, we have to work very respectfully with the government of the Solomon Islands. They are a sovereign government and they are entitled to make their own decisions in their own national interest, and they don't welcome Australians or anyone else coming and lecturing them. We have to work with them, and I think it's a real mistake the way in which Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese have sought to politicise this in the last few days, particularly because the Labor Party has previously cried bipartisanship if ever their record on national security was criticised.
Fair go. I mean, you're politicising it here and now, talking about what Richard Marles has done.
Well, I absolutely think there should be a contest over national security, but that's not the Labor Party's publicly stated position. When we were criticising their record on China and national security, they held up the shield of bipartisanship and said we're not allowed to do that because it's inappropriate to politicise national security. I think there should be a contest. We're in an election campaign. Of course, people should be able to choose between the two different offerings at this election, and they are very different when it comes to national security and defence.
Well, what do you want Richard Marles or Anthony Albanese to do? What do they need to do now?
Well, I think they need to acknowledge that Richard Marles' comments were wrong, that they were mistaken. He should apologise for them and retract them and say that, in fact, China is our strategic competitor in the Pacific, and it is not in Australia's national interest to encourage them into the Pacific and to establish military bases. Why
is this important to me, sitting in the traffic on the Monash on the way in from Berwick? Why do I care?
Well, Neil, it's very serious indeed, and anyone who's familiar with the history of the war in the Pacific will understand why the Solomons and the South Pacific in particular are important to Australia. It was objective of the Imperial Japanese Navy at the time to deny the peaceful access of the US naval fleet from the west coast of the United States to the east coast of Australia. That was a key strategic objective of theirs, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the Chinese government is seeking to establish the same military presence on a really critical naval supply line for Australia.
Did they bribe their way into this?
Well, it's pretty clear, Neil, that China doesn't play by the same rules that Australia does. We are a liberal democracy governed by the rule of law, and there are things that we are not prepared to do, which the Chinese government is very comfortable doing in the Solomons and elsewhere in the Pacific.
Okay. Can this be undone?
Well, the Prime Minister Sogavare has made some very important commitments after the draft agreement was leaked into public. He promised that there would be no permanent Chinese military presence and there would be no Chinese military bases. And that's a commitment he wasn't just making to Australia and other people, other countries in the region, but a commitment he made to the people of the Solomon Islands, who I don't think would welcome a permanent Chinese military presence on their sovereign territory. And so he needs to live up to those commitments he's made.
Thank you very much. Senator James Patterson, Liberal Senator Victoria, Chair of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, and he's been beating the drum about China for some time, and understandably so. 133693. Look, it's not one of those grassroots issues which